9 German fighters hold altitude above. The Spitfire's engine trembles. The fuel needle is sinking toward its final mark. Behind him, the RAF formation has collapsed. Some aircraft are falling. Others have already vanished from the sky. According to the manual, he should climb. According to orders, he should hold formation. According to the logic of men who have never been locked at 400 miles per hour, he should disengage. He does not. He pushes the control column forward. The nose drops. Gravity becomes an ally. Speed turns into armor. In the minutes that follow, there is no formation, no ceremony. Only one pilot, one Spitfire, and the physical limits of man and machine being dragged toward breaking point. His name is Pat Pattle, and this story is not about what he destroyed in the sky. It is about the moment when air combat in the Second World War was forced to change in order to survive. In the spring of 1941, the air war over Europe was entering a dangerous phase. Not because of a lack of aircraft, not because of a shortage of pilots, but because the way men thought about fighting in the sky was already obsolete. From the ground, the sky looked calm. Thin white contrails cut clean lines across a pale blue-gray ceiling. Fighter formations flew in tight, orderly patterns, balanced and symmetrical, like diagrams lifted straight from a training manual. Up there, however, the sky was killing men with quiet efficiency. The Royal Air Force entered the Second World War with a clear conviction. Discipline in formation, close mutual support, and turning dogfights would deliver superiority. This belief was not naive. It was inherited from the First World War, from military academies where air combat was dissected on maps, sand tables, and chalkboards. In the manuals, air combat was an orderly equation. 3 aircraft, VIC formations, flying close together. Wingmen glued to their leader's tail. When engaged, the entire formation turned, climbed, and maneuvered as one. From a distance, it looked cohesive. From the ground, it looked disciplined. In combat, it was rigid. And rigid structures always fail under stress. The German Air Force did not share this faith. After years of experimentation in Spain, the Luftwaffe had reached a different conclusion. Pilots do not survive because formations look good. They survive because they see first, decide first, strike first, and leave first. Instead of flying in threes, German fighters operated in pairs. One pilot leading. One pilot positioned behind and slightly above. Distance was measured not in meters, but in visibility. The result was lethal flexibility. Each pilot had room to see. Each aircraft retained freedom of action. Pairs could split, rejoin, or swap roles in seconds. Where the RAF flew as blocks, the Luftwaffe flew as networks. And in a network, prey is isolated and destroyed piece by piece. By early 1941, reports from the front began to sound eerily similar. Young pilots killed on their 3rd or 4th sortie. Aircraft lost while still holding correct formation. Squadrons returning home incomplete with no rules broken. The RAF did not lack courage. What it lacked was time to learn without paying in blood. Debriefings focused on weather, mission objectives, formation discipline. Few discussed why German fighters always attacked from above, why they targeted aircraft on the edges of formations, why they disengaged before the RAF could react. It was not superior marksmanship, it was energy management. At this stage of the war, the RAF did not yet speak of energy fighting. But air combat had always been an exchange. Altitude traded for speed. Speed traded for position. Position traded for opportunity. German pilots climbed first, waited, then struck downward. They did not turn to demonstrate skill. They hit and vanished. Many British pilots, meanwhile, had been taught a simpler rule. Whoever turns tighter wins. Reality offered a harsher truth. Whoever decides faster survives. The mismatch did not kill instantly. It killed methodically. In this environment, Pat Pattle did not stand out. He was not loud. He did not dominate briefings. He did not argue doctrine. Born in 1914 in South Africa, he grew up in a culture where work mattered more than talk. Machines were understood, not revered. Problems were fixed, not debated. When he joined the RAF, his record was unremarkable. On time, by the book. No disciplinary notes, Except for one detail the manuals could not measure. He listened to his aircraft. After every sortie, Pat walked around his aircraft. Hands on the wing, eyes on the skin, ears tuned to the sound of cooling metal. He asked mechanics questions others did not. How did the ailerons feel at high speed? Any vibration in a steep dive? Was there delay in the elevator response? He was not inspecting for damage. He was mapping limits. Where many pilots treated aircraft as machines governed by manuals, Pat treated his Spitfire as a system that could be learned. The difference was subtle, and in war, subtle differences decide who lives. No one remembers exactly when Pat first plunged straight through an enemy formation. Only that after several engagements, he returned more often. His aircraft bore bullet holes, but he lived. He avoided prolonged turning fights. Instead of turning, he climbed. Instead of holding, he released. Instead of chasing, he struck and left. To some officers, it looked dangerous. To younger pilots, it looked like an exit. Pat did not challenge authority. He did not campaign for reform. He did not write memoranda. He simply flew in a way that kept him alive. That created tension. Process said one thing, results said another. In meeting rooms, process always won. In the air, it often lost. That contradiction had not yet been acknowledged. There was no consensus, no decisive proof, but proof was coming. Unlike the skies over Britain, the Mediterranean offered little margin. Long distances, slow rescue, limited fuel. A wrong decision did not mean capture. It meant disappearance. Here, Pat's dives were no longer personal quirks. They were survival reflexes. And in a coming engagement, the limits of man, machine, and doctrine would all be tested at once. At this moment, Pat Pattle was not yet a legend. There was no famous sortie, no shocking number, only a pilot who understood his aircraft, a system clinging to old rules, a sky approaching a moment it could not ignore. What followed would not just be a dogfight. It would be a collision between doctrine and reality always wins, paid for in blood. The sky never announces when it changes. There is no signal, no official order, only a moment after which things can no longer return to the way they were. For the Royal Air Force, that moment did not happen in a briefing room. It happened above 20,000 feet, inside engine noise and compressed time, where procedure died before it could react. That morning began like hundreds before it. Weather acceptable, wind steady, scattered cloud. The mission briefing used familiar words: patrol, escort, intercept. No one said disaster. No one said turning point. RAF squadrons lifted off exactly as trained. Altitudes assigned. VIC formations locked tight. Radio calls short, formal, correct. From the ground, it looked disciplined. From the air, it was a large structure flying straight into a killing zone. The Luftwaffe was not in a hurry. They did not need to be. They had climbed earlier. They had chosen position. Above, Messerschmitt 109s flew in loose pairs, spaced wide enough that no pilot blocked another's view. No one was trapped by someone else's decision. Below them, a second layer of Focke-Wulf 19s waited in reserve. Faster, heavier, patient. This was not chaos, and it was a layered trap built with time. When the two forces sighted each other, there was no explosion, no first shot. Only subtle movement. A German wingtip dipped. British noses began to rise. This was the merge. The point where decisions are made by instinct, not planning. The RAF leader issued the correct order. Climb, hold formation, prepare to turn. At that moment, Pat Pattle already knew what would follow. He had seen it too many times. As the British climbed, the Messerschmitts did exactly what experience had taught them. They allowed themselves to be drawn in. They turned just enough to maintain separation. They waited. Then the Focke-Wulfs dropped. Not to shoot immediately, but to break structure. One RAF aircraft forced outward was enough. The formation began to open, overlap sightlines, lose rhythm. Within seconds, discipline dissolved into isolated survival. Pat did not wait for another command, not out of rebellion, but because he understood that 5 more seconds would leave him with only one option: to turn and eventually die. He looked up. He looked down. He glanced at airspeed. Then he made a decision the manuals did not authorize. He pushed the control column forward. The Spitfire pitched down, not a glide, not a controlled disengagement, a true dive, where gravity accelerated the aircraft faster than the engine ever could. Compressed air stiffened the controls. The speed needle entered territory mechanics preferred not to see. The airframe trembled. The wings spoke in steady vibration. Pat did not panic. He had felt this before. He knew what it meant, and he knew this was not yet the final limit. From the German perspective, what followed was illogical. A Spitfire did not climb, did not turn, did not maintain distance. It plunged through airspace where no target was expected, no pilot was looking, no reaction time existed. Not because they were slow, but because their decision loop collapsed. There was no observe, orient, decide act. Only a shape passing too fast to answer. Pat was not hunting glory. He was creating space. He did not choose the center aircraft. He chose the one drifting at the edge. A short burst, 2 seconds. No fireball, no spectacle. Only an aircraft that lost aerodynamic integrity and fell away. Pat did not look back. After firing, Pat did not do what instinct demanded. He did not turn to follow. He let speed carry him through the formation, let momentum pull him clear of the danger zone. Only when altitude had dropped enough did he pull back. Not vertical, not abrupt. A shallow climb designed to preserve speed, regain position, restore awareness. Back above, Pat did not rejoin the fight. He watched. Below him, the RAF formation no longer existed. Each aircraft fought alone. Each pilot managed his own survival. Messerschmitts chased, Focke-Wulfs struck. The sky became a moving maze. And within that maze, Pat existed outside the dominant rhythm. That gave him a privilege no manual described, the freedom to choose. Pat saw a British fighter under pursuit, not a heroic moment, a calculation. Turning in would be too slow. Climbing would be too late. He dove, shallower this time, fast enough. Rounds fired from farther out, but true. The German broke off. The British aircraft escaped. Pat left again. German pilots started to notice something wrong. Not because of numbers, but because a new rhythm was intruding. A Spitfire that did not turn, did not stay, always came from above, always vanished before retaliation. To counter it, they had to look up, divide attention, lose focus on primary targets. That was enough to shift balance. Pat did not label what he was doing. He did not think in doctrines. He thought in conditions. Altitude gave time. The dive gave initiative. Departure gave survival. Over minutes, he repeated the cycle. Climb, observe, dive, fire, exit, no turning contests, no prolonged pursuit, only compressed decisions. Each dive pressed the aircraft harder, controls heavier, vibrations stronger, engine temperatures rising. Pat felt it through the stick, not the gauges. He knew he was approaching margins, but he also knew remaining in turning fights meant near certain death. This was not bravery, it was risk comparison. The turning point was not a single kill. It was this: one RAF pilot surviving by refusing the old rhythm. German formations forced into defense, a battle that no longer flowed in one direction. As the fight thinned, the sky felt different. Not because one side had annihilated the other, but because initiative had changed hands. When Pat returned to base, there was no cheering, only eyes on. Wings, fuselage, slight upward bends near the tips. The mechanics did not ask how many he claimed. They asked, "What did you do to it?" As usual, Pat said little. Debrief reports did not align. Some spoke of broken formation. Others mentioned a lone Spitfire attacking from above. No one said new doctrine, but everyone felt something had shifted. No orders changed that day. No one commanded pilots to fly like Pattle. But afterward, some climbed higher before engaging. Some fired and left instead of turning again. Some survived when they should not have. The crack existed. A turning point is not a medal, not a statistic, not a legend. It is the moment reality forces a system to hesitate. When doctrine cannot explain survival, Doctrine loses absolute authority. What followed would not be clean. As more pilots experimented, as more machines were pushed to limits, the cost would rise. Not everyone was Pat Pattle. Not everyone understood their aircraft that deeply. And in the hell that followed, the margin between survival and destruction would become razor thin. If Part 2 marked the moment doctrine began to fracture, Part 3 is where the cost of change becomes visible, not on maps, not in reports, but inside the human body, the airframe, and the thin margin where judgment meets physics. After the first engagements in which Pat Pattle and a handful of others survived by diving at extreme speed, a dangerous illusion began to form. If you do this correctly, you will live. War never allows formulas that simple. The new method was not a cure. It merely moved risk from one place to another, from being methodically shot down in prolonged turning fights, to being crushed by acceleration, being betrayed by overstressed metal, losing consciousness while still airborne. Aircraft were studied obsessively, the pilot far less so. Training manuals rarely addressed, sustained high G-forces, blackout and G-induced loss of consciousness, cumulative fatigue after repeated sorties. Every time Pat dove and pulled out, his body endured, several times its own weight. Blood draining from the brain, vision collapsing into a narrow tunnel. He learned to pull only as hard as necessary, relax muscles at precise moments, breathe in patterns no one formally taught him. Those who copied the dive without understanding this did not return. The Spitfire was a masterpiece of aerodynamics. It was not designed for repeated near-terminal dives, multiple extreme pullouts in a single engagement, prolonged vibration near the onset of flutter. Each time Pat exceeded design limits, he was fatiguing the wings, overheating the engine, loosening rivets invisible to the eye. Ground crews began to notice slight upward bends in the wings, hairline cracks in the structure, engines needing replacement far earlier than expected. The aircraft remembered every abuse. No official order followed the turning point, but within squadrons, pilots watched. They copied quietly. They experimented. Some believed speed alone was the answer. They did not understand that. Speed was not the goal. Control of speed was survival. One dive too steep, one pull too late, 2 seconds of unconsciousness. 2 seconds were enough. In traditional turning combat, there were options. Widen the circle, break off, disengage. In a high-speed dive, once the nose dropped, the decision became one way. There was no reconsideration, no correction, no extra time. A mistake did not kill slowly. It ended everything at once. What separated Pat from those who died was not blind courage. It was restraint. He did not dive unless conditions favored it. He disengaged immediately when they did not. He refused to turn a tactic into a habit. Every dive had a purpose. Every pullout respected a limit. He was not chasing sensation. He was calculating survival. Not every experiment succeeded. Some pilots dove too deep, pulled too hard, lost consciousness before the aircraft responded. There were no cameras, no witnesses. Only a vertical smoke trail ending in the sea. Reports recorded them as lost during combat. No one wrote, he tried something new and did not yet know enough. Innovation always carries unrecorded casualties. Each sortie became heavier than the last, not because the enemy improved, but because responsibility increased. If a correct dive could save a wingman, then a wrong one could kill both. There was no formation to hide behind, no procedure to absorb blame, only the pilot and his choice. Those who survived changed. They spoke less, laughed less, argued less. They understood theory collapses in seconds. Debate ends under G-load. Air combat ceased to feel noble. It became work, cold and exacting. Pat continued to fly. Not for recognition, not to prove doctrine wrong, but because he understood if experienced pilots withdrew, the inexperienced would try and die. He flew to maintain the rhythm, observe enemy adaptation, learn the true limits of both sides. Each sortie edged closer to the boundary. Even Pat was not immune. After repeated missions, reactions slowed by fractions of a second. Vision took longer to recover. Vibrations transmitted more clearly through the stick. He told no one. In war, admitting fatigue meant removal from the air. Pat found himself increasingly alone. Those who understood had already fallen. Those still flying did not yet understand. He stood between a doctrine not yet abandoned, a new method not yet accepted. That is the most dangerous place to exist. Over time, one truth became unavoidable. The enemy killed fewer pilots than fatigue, overconfidence, misunderstanding the new approach. Hell was not beyond the canopy. It was inside the cockpit. Every military evolution demands payment. There were no formal instructions, structured training, physiological safeguards. Men like Pat paid with their bodies. They were not only fighting the enemy, they were fighting the incompleteness of the future. One correct dive destroyed an opponent, saved a comrade. One incorrect dive required no bullets, only gravity. The difference was measured in fractions of a second. As more pilots adopted the method, the sky grew less forgiving. There was no room for half-trained flyers, poor maintenance, hesitation. The war had escalated. Despite exhaustion, Pat continued, not because he believed himself invulnerable, but because someone had to hold the line, until the system learned. He flew while tired, while aircraft weakened, while war consumed men faster than ever. Hell is not ignorance. Hell is knowing. Knowing you are near the limit, knowing the risk, and flying anyway. Pat did not act blindly. He acted fully aware. That weight exceeded any G-force. As the new way proved itself, as doctrine began to shift, Pat had already spent too long in the danger zone. War rarely allows pioneers to rest. What followed would not be elegant. It would be a lower, faster, more chaotic, without recovery from error. The final cost of the hell within was about to be paid. War does not promise clean endings. It does not reward being right early. It rewards only those who remain alive long enough to reach the next moment. For Pat Pattle, that next moment did not last as long as the legacy he left behind. By early 1941, the war shifted south. The Balkans became a secondary front on paper, and one of the most unforgiving in practice. Greece offered none of the advantages of Western Europe. Long distances from base, mountainous terrain, few alternate airfields, no strategic depth. Every sortie here was a gamble. Pat Pattle was sent to Greece not for prestige, but for experience. Where systems were stretched thin, the RAF relied on men who already understood how not to die. Air combat over Greece was different. Aircraft launched with limited fuel. Enemy fighters appeared fast, low, and unexpected. Reaction time collapsed. Many engagements began while pilots were still, climbing, forming up, searching for the fight. Pat no longer had the luxury to build altitude at will, shape the engagement, prepare ideal dive profiles. What remained was instinct. There was no final spectacular sortie, no dramatic reversal, no cinematic tally. Pat's final days looked like thousands of others in the war. Fly, engage, return, if possible. No cameras, no detailed records, only fatigue accumulating, and a body that had already endured more than it was built to carry. The date was not marked as historic. No special briefing, no decisive mission. Pat Pattle took off on a low-level support mission over Greece. Low altitude, compressed space, no room to trade height for time. In these conditions, the advantages of vertical combat nearly vanished. At low altitude, there is no reserve of energy, no vertical escape, no recovery window. German aircraft appeared. Combat followed almost instantly. Pat was hit, not during a reckless dive, not while testing a new idea, just a round placed correctly at the wrong moment. The aircraft lost control. There was no altitude to correct it. Pat Pattle was killed at the age of 26. There was no grand memorial, no public announcement. The war was consuming pilots too quickly to pause. In official records, his death was noted simply, killed in action. No tactical analysis, no summary of contribution, only an empty bunk. Pat's death did not shock the system. Those who understood him best were already gone. Those who remained were busy surviving. There was no time to write doctrine, formalize lessons, name what he had done, but silence never lasts forever. After battles where pilots climbed higher before engaging, fired once and disengaged, refused prolonged turning fights, Pat's name was not spoken, but his logic was present. Pilots did not say, "Fly like Pattle." They said, "Don't stay in the turn. Keep altitude. Hit and leave." War does not remember who thought first. It remembers what kept men alive. As statistics shifted, survival rates improved. Losses in turning fights decreased. Pilots returned with fewer claims, but intact aircraft. The system began to listen. By late 1942 and into 1943, training schools began discussing energy. Altitude became potential, not position. Speed became a weapon, not a byproduct. What Pat had done intuitively was translated by others into diagrams, lectures, rules, not to honor him, but to reduce casualties. As American forces entered the air war in force, fast strike and disengage became standard. Aircraft were built to endure high speed. Pilots were trained to avoid prolonged turning. No one called it primitive anymore. It was simply effective. Pat Pattle left behind no manual, no school bearing his name, no official doctrine. He left a way of thinking. Rules are tools. Reality is the measure. Survival is the objective. Historians debate his exact kill count, which claims were confirmed, what was exaggerated. The debate misses the point. Numbers do not save lives. Methods do. In military history, pioneers pay the highest cost. They operate without protection, work inside doctrinal blind spots, absorb risk before systems adapt. Pat Pattle was one of them. Pat's death does not invalidate his thinking. It proves something harsher. No tactic eliminates risk. No individual outruns probability forever. War does not choose the most correct. It chooses the most fortunate, long enough. Modern air combat is built on the same principles. Energy dominance, control of tempo, engagement on favorable terms only. These principles carry the imprint of decisions made first by men like Pat. Pat Pattle's story is not about a single sortie, a dramatic number, a heroic ending. It is about rational decisions in irrational conditions. Reality overriding doctrine. Change beginning in the cockpit, not the conference room. Pat's legacy applies beyond aviation to any system where process lags behind reality. Rules persist past usefulness. People are punished for adapting. Those who change systems are rarely celebrated while alive. They are tolerated later when their absence is no longer inconvenient. War does not reward pioneers. It uses their results. Pat did not win the war. He did not decide a campaign. He did something smaller and more important. He showed a way that killed fewer people. The sky over Greece where Pat Pattle fell is quiet now. No engines, no smoke, no turning circles. Yet every time a pilot climbs to buy time, strikes fast and disengages, refuses a fight that offers no advantage, a fragment of Pat Pattle's logic is still flying, unmarked, uncelebrated, alive.